Welcome to another SPL mixing tutorial. Today I'm looking at mixing with compression only and mixing with harmonic distortion only. These were a few mix challenges that I set on the 24th of June. We went to a vote across all social media, and what you guys really wanted to see were both the compression only and the harmonic distortion only mixes. So that's what we've ended up with. Because we couldn't decide which one was more popular, I'm going to go through both in this video. It could be a long video. I might put some links in the description so that you can jump between the different sections and have a listen. Speaking of listening, have a listen to the song in its finished form after I've mixed it with compression. Alright, there's a little bit of a taste of what I've done. What I might do is I might tack them on to the end of the video, or I might just have it on a Google Drive sitting somewhere where you guys can have a listen to the complete song and compare it to the harmonic distortion only challenge. I'm not going to lie, it was a massive challenge to do both the harmonic distortion challenge as well as the compressor only challenge. Now I thought I knew compressors, but it was really quite difficult. We've got a lot to cover. Let's start at the very end of the chain. Actually, at the very end. This is something that is part of my template. I normally have a print track here, but it's hidden. Basically, this is a plugin that I use, and it's not actually anything to do with compression, but it's there just so I can get an idea of the tonal balance. It doesn't process the audio, it's just there for assessing what the balance from lows to low mids to high mids to highs are. Very cool plugin. Before that, the very last thing that you can hear in the chain is actually this limiter, the Ozone 8. Nothing earth-shattering there. I've selected this compressor. I like it better than the other ones. There is complete stereo independence for transient and sustained processing. Before that, obviously I tried a few different compressors. What I decided to go with was the SSL compressor initially, and then I just popped this one in and I'm like, I actually like the sound of that. I had to back off the input quite a bit. It's not being driven very hard and it's not doing a lot. Okay, if we go to the back end of the song, not doing a lot of compression there, which is great. That's how I like my bus compressors. Before that, we have a bit of overall processing. It is not an EQ. I'm not using any of the gains. What I am using is the range. Anything below the line, it is attenuating. Anything above, it is actually boosting. Okay, which comes in very handy for tone shaping, but it's reacting to this threshold. Every time something goes over each of these thresholds in these bands, if we've got a positive range, it's actually going to boost whatever goes over that threshold there. It's going to boost it by a specific amount. Okay, I'm not cheating. You'll see that none of these different bands are actually being stuck in any one position. So then I'm not using them like an EQ. It's still being used like a compressor. And to be quite honest, I probably wouldn't have been able to take on this challenge without having access to a multi-band compressor. You'll notice too that I'm actually doing multi-mono versions of this. And what that means is this is a master link for the channels, right? So we've got the left and a right channel. All that means is that if I change, let's just change that because we're not using it. If I change that, it's now changed on the other side, okay? So the controls are linked, The actual processing is independent on the left side and on the right side. The reason being that I've got that pretty much across every single stereo process. Okay, I'm using multi-mono stereo compressors. I like the fact that if something is loud on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, that both of those sides aren't pulled down because of some event happening on either channel. Okay, and what I like about it is that it creates a little bit of a movement. It does destabilize the stereo image slightly. Okay, if you're not sure what I mean by that, let me know in the comments. But basically, I like it. It gives me a bit of movement from left to right, which I really like. Yeah, so obviously we've got a trim here. That's just dropping the level of everything. That's a master fader, dropping the level of everything that feeds into this Mixbus. Okay. You'll also see this arrangement on my Harmonic Distortion only mix. But this here, anyone who's a fan of Michael Brower would kind of recognize what it is that I'm doing here. Yeah, so normally I would have some sort of stereo widening happening on the D bus. We're not doing that today. We're pretty much using SSL for all of these except for the B bus. So A is being sent, I believe, the vocals, B is being sent drums and bass, C is guitars, D might be everything else. We'll see as we go along. Now, notice here I've actually got a high pass. Okay, so this is receiving rear left in my buses, rear left. So obviously it's a mono signal. And you might say, well, hang on, why are you using EQ? The only reason this is here, apart from it being part of one of my templates, is the fact that it is not actually something that is heard. So the left signal is getting sent here, the left and the right are getting sent here. But this channel sends out to here into the side chain of the compressor that's on this channel. All that means, it's not that complicated. Basically, it means that I like this version of the 1176. And what I'm actually lacking is the ability to control how much bass is seen by this compressor. So all this is doing is it's taking away the low end that this compressor sees. I'll mute this. Here we go. And watch this needle. So see how much harder it compresses when I have that bypassed? All that means is that that low end information is triggering this compressor a lot more. I don't like that, and this enables me to just have a little bit more control over it. We are using a setting of all buttons in. I don't want to make this video too long, but basically these are groups. Instruments are being sent to these individual buses. This is a place where things can be sent as well if we want to add a little bit more reinforcement. A, C, D buses or SSL. Yes, I'm clipping. I don't mind a bit of clipping if you can't hear it. On the B bus, I've got a DBX, and I've also got this Focusrite channel strip. The EQ's flat and the compressor is doing its thing. Same thing here. Nothing happening on the EQ side. It's just the compressor that we're using. They're all slightly different ratios. So these are just groups, and feeding those groups are these trims here. So it allows me to, if something's too loud or distorting too much, I can drop it down here before it gets to the actual channels here. And then if I need to, I can make it up, or I can turn it down more, or whatever I want to do on these faders. I then trim that going into there. As a bit of a primer, have a look at the Michael Brower mixing technique. This is essentially my take on it. Let's have a look. So we've got a cymbal here. So I'm actually smoothing it out. I'm getting a little bit more length because it's got a lot of makeup gain. It's got a very low threshold. The attack is quite quick, so we're taking away a lot of that transient that I wasn't liking. Interesting choice that I ended up with the SSL comp, but I tried a few different compressors and that's the one that I went with. In another video, which I'll link above, I went through the mix preparation. One of those processes was to enhance the stereo field of these drums. You're hearing a delayed version on this second side here. It's the same for the hi-hats, same for the ride cymbal and all the tom-toms. Moving on to the hi-hat. I wasn't particularly happy with the groove of the hi-hat. So I wanted to smooth it out. I wanted to enhance the groove. As I said earlier, anything above the line is getting upwardly compressed. It's getting boosted every time frequencies come into this band and they go above. It's pushing it up and it's attacking it quite hard so that it's grabbing that straight away and it's releasing reasonably quickly. We're attenuating a lot here. For tone shaping, this is what I've ended up with. It looks like a very drastic amount of processing, and it is, but you got to do that to get the results. I'm not sure why I put this on. Probably again to enhance the groove. Adding a little bit of distortion to smooth it out. Any harshness, I've actually put a de-esser on the end just to attack that. Okay, let's move along. Ride cymbal, we've got SSL. It's not quite as aggressive as the settings that we had on this. The attack is opened up a little bit just to let that transient through. Here's how that sounds. We've got a duplicate of the kick. We'll get to that in a second. And we have obviously a multi-band compressor and we have these bands bypassed. This particular band I've got, looks like a fast attack, quite a long release. This particular band, I'm attacking it quite hard and releasing quite hard. If we say reduce this down, have a listen. Not nearly as exciting. You can just get a little bit more of that low end coming through. We're bypassed here. I've left it there because I'm actually using it on the duplicate. I like what that's adding. You know, it's not doing a lot of compression, but it is adding a bit of thickness to it and it just adds that little bit of grit that I like. Adds quite a bit actually. We are driving the input. It's not compressing a whole heap. Just got a limiter there just to bring up the level, and we have pretty much the same settings, except we have this here. EQ is flat. We have a high pass in the side chain, a bit like we did earlier. And so that's something that's affecting the compressor, but it's not heard as an EQ move. And here's how that one sounds. And two together. They seem to just work together really well. Now listen, pretty much all of the decisions that I've made in a mix are going to be made in context. If you're looking at this and you're going, this doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Like, why is he throwing a de-esser on the hi-hats? The reason might be is that in the context of the mix, it didn't work and to have that much high end. And so I'm reacting, in real time to what I'm hearing. Sometimes we do weird stuff to get the results that we want. Just as a quick overview of the drums, each of these is getting sent to the B bus eventually. The kick and the snare are also getting fed out to the Mixbus by varying amounts. The reason being is that at some point what I'm doing here is not enough, and so just to get that little bit extra punch through, you just send it through to the Mixbus. No need to make life difficult and have to rechange all these settings. Sometimes it's just easier to go, you know what, I'll send it out to the Mixbus, and 90% of the time that works really well. Let's move on to the snare. The snare, this is an interesting one because we've got the C6. So originally how this started off, I quite liked the sound of the C6 multi-band compressor going into the BF76. Okay, but this particular track, it had a lot of stuff happening. Like you can see these little in-between notes. I couldn't process it the way that I wanted to process it. And one way that I wanted to process it was to actually make the notes longer. So I chopped every major snare hit out and I dropped it onto another track. And so what we end up with is this. It's the reverse. So I've actually picked this up, moved it down. So you get that explosion of top end by having it afterwards. Originally, that's how this C6 looked until I changed it so that it was actually giving me a darker transient. Okay, that doesn't make sense? Let me know and I'll explain that. But basically, this is giving me all the transients and this is giving me the length of the note and a nice long decay. Together we get this. So it means that I can get a nice sound by having this in here without bringing up all these other little taps in between and turning it into a mess, basically. In context. Okay, both of those snares are getting sent to here. They're getting limited. It's to stop it from clipping. It's getting really attenuated there. And it's, as I stated earlier, it's getting sent out to the Mixbus. Quite a lot of the snare sound is actually coming from that. Tom-toms, tom 1 here. Where are we? This one here. Just to give it a little bit of a stereo spread, here's where we started. All right, getting a nice big length to the note. Upwardly compressing with a fast attack in the low end. So much more interesting. Then we have Trans-X wide, because I didn't want so much of the transient on this particular tom hit. Severely attenuated. Just something to shave off that transient. Then it's getting sent to a length bus, and that bus is a bit crazy. Not sure I understand what I was doing there, but obviously made sense to me at the time. Often I make these decisions and I don't necessarily think about it logically. It's not the frame of mind that you want to be in when you're mixing this stuff. You want to be totally in a creative mindset. Tom-tom 2, so it's got the Kramer Pi again, and we only hear it very occasionally, this tom-tom. Okay, that's working. However you get the sound, you get the sound. Okay, very nice tom-tom sound after all of that processing from where it started. The copy of it, good bit of length out of that note, and that's with the all buttons in approach with quite a lot of input fed into that compressor. A very fast attack. You don't want to be enhancing transients on something that is designed to be more in the background. In this case is what I've done. Okay. Really get rid of that transient. Tom-tom 2 in particular is getting sent to this, which is a bit of mid-range transient boost. Very subtle. What else? Well, we've got the bass. So I have the API compressor on that. I've just turned off everything that this feeds into, but we've got a bass mic and a bass DI there feeding into this bass master. And then that is then fed out to the B bus where the drums are being sent. It was also being sent to the rear bus. Okay. The DI has... Okay, I'm not sure why I made those decisions. They probably made more sense in context with the mix and what I was trying to achieve at that particular moment. Together, we have But that wasn't enough. I've added in this 1176. The attack is wide open, so it's actually enhancing that attack, and then we're just enhancing it that little bit more with the Trans-X. So in the context of the mix, it actually sounds a little bit more like a picked bass. It works, you know, as crazy as all of these processing decisions are. Needed to have that transient to really cut through. And that helps to drive the tune along. Yeah, there's that. And the claps. Okay, we're adding quite a lot of processing there. Stereo unlinked, so multi-mono. Because I'm not attacking that band as much. What that means is as soon as this crosses the threshold, it's waiting a little bit of time before it attacks it. And because we're doing upward compression, what that means is that basically it's waiting before it boosts this up. And so what we get between all of this stuff is, are we using that one? Yes, we are. So we're going to hear this frequency first because it's being gained up quite a lot with the range. We're hearing that first, and you'll get like this bang, bang, bang effect. It's a little bit hard to see. So we've got 56 and 104 there. If we went down to that on all bands, it's texturally not as interesting as if we do this. So that's just a nice little tweak. I might explain that in a different tutorial. Guitars, I've definitely put in some thought to having, in particular, the verse. This electric guitar is sitting closer to the center, and it branches out a little bit, and then it gets full wide for the chorus. Here's how that sounds. Sorry, so we go full wide out for the pre-chorus, okay? And you'll see there's a few other different panning decisions that are made here. You know, for a moment, this guitar swaps sides, and same with this one here and here. Apart from that, Kramer Pi on this one, and let's have a quick listen. So these two parts, they work off of each other. So we're getting quite a lot more length from that. They've obviously got some reverb on them already. The compression in this case actually enhances a lot of that. And it's probably because we have a longish decay time. The compression ratio is what it is, and we've got a low threshold. We're compressing quite hard. The guitars are starting off a little bit louder, if we think of it like that. We're compressing them hard, so we're squashing down that initial transient quite hard. But because we've actually boosted the overall level, before any compression is applied, we're turning up that tail. As that compressor comes back up, it's bringing up the tail with it because of the amount of boost that we've added. What else have we got? We got no processing on that. Everything in the guitars is controlled by the VCA. Okay, what we have is an overall dip in the low mids. Quite a bit of a boost there as well, so it's a little bit hard to A/B. We've also got this duplicate. Its primary purpose is parallel, okay? It's not there to enhance transients at all, okay? It's just there to thicken up the sound. We have all the sound effects enhanced in the mid-range. Here's how they sound. Okay, I like what that's doing. Just something to tickle the ears. This, if you don't know what this is, it's a low level and a high level compressor. This is an upward compression band and this is a downward compression band. Anything below this threshold, this arbitrary threshold, gets boosted up when you move this fader up. Anything over this threshold gets attenuated, okay? And so it gets kind of boxed into this particular range. It's a great compressor, absolutely love it. Good for containing sounds. There's no attack and release controls on that. Now we get to the lead vocals. So I've actually split up the verse, the pre-chorus and the chorus into a few different processing chains.
I got this feeling once again, those bedroom eyes are
slightly different, and then
calling out my name, calling out the window, she's calling out my name.
It all makes sense when it's in context. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense when you start soloing it like this, but I imagine that what was going through my head when I made this decision to put a limiter first was so that anything that's kind of going to make the downward stream compressors react, it was going to essentially stop that from happening and catch those transients. Let's see if I'm right.
I got this feeling once again.
So we're getting a little bit of attenuation there. That's good. It's just attacking those peaks. Doing a lot of compression here when we consider this is boosting the low level stuff and squashing the high level stuff.
I got this feeling once again.
The vocal was quite dynamic and so it needed it. Now we start to tone shape a bit, and this is essentially a phone filter. Like when you look at it, we're doing a lot of upward compression in this range here.
I got this feeling once again.
And essentially what I could have done is soloed that band, but it needed this other stuff and I've just ended up attenuating.
I got this feeling once again.
And just getting rid of some of that top end sizzle. And then this compressor, I'm not sure what these different styles are, but this one in particular, the vocal enhance, tended to add a lot of top end naturally, more than these other ones, and so that's the one I went with. It does have a wet dry mix control and I'm not pushing it too hard. Let's have a listen.
I got this feeling once again.
Gives quite a lot of distortion and a bit of an enhancement, like it says, to the top end of the voice.
I got this feeling once again.
Obviously I didn't need the full amount. I'm compressing it quite hard. In context, it needed something to catch those S's.
I got this feeling once again. I think I'll knock on number 10.
Okay.
I got this feeling once again. I got this feeling once again. I got this feeling once again.
Hopefully you can hear the difference between those two. Similar sort of stuff here, except I've got, it looks like a vocal rider, and that would be because the pre-chorus kind of, the singer tended to trail off. Let's have a look. So it's just to write up those back ends of the phrases. Similar sort of processing, quite aggressive, not as aggressive as the verse processing. Opened out the tone a little bit in the low end. It's now boosting here, very much like a telephone type of effect. The drama, compressing a lot harder, but using a little bit less of it compared to what we had here. Because we're making it harsher, using the drama, getting it really gritty, it obviously needed to have a bit of de-essing. So we've got a standard type of de-esser, but then on top of that, I've got this one, which is set to wideband, more or less like a compressor, but it's set very high. Okay, so it's only there just to catch a few different things.
I fantasize about her. I realize those bedroom eyes are.
Just to catch those little moments. The lead vocal didn't need a lot by the looks of it. It's getting compressed, not quite as much during the chorus. We are using more of this drama compressor.
Calling out my name.
Okay.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window.
Isn't it amazing what a compressor can do? Pretty incredible. Who would have thought that you could mix a song using compression? Never would have thought it would have been this effective.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name. Calling out the window. Calling out my name.
Pretty cool, thickening it up.
Calling out my name, calling out the window.
Okay, and then we obviously needed to control the S.
Calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
All right, with the duplicates that we've got here,
Calling out my name, calling out the window.
which are the Haas effects. We're not compressing as much, we're using a little bit more of it. We're still using the vocal enhance, but we haven't done anything to kind of level it out. These are much more dynamic and they seem to come across a lot more darker sounding.
Calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name. Calling out the window, calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
We've got this doubled up vocal here. It's not actually doing a lot. I'm probably not doing much at all.
Calling out my name, calling out the window.
Pretty horrible sounding double in terms of like the tuning. Now the vocal master, once again, it's being paralleled. It's got similar processing on both. And this is obviously a similar theme that you've seen. The calling out, all the really hard sounds, they really irritated me. So I got a Trans X wide onto those and that's just cutting those down.
Calling out my name, calling out my name, calling out the,
Just softening those a bit.
calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
Whilst it looks like a lot of compression, the result is probably not a lot different to having it doing a little bit up here. Okay, as long as it's dancing around here and not going back and forth, you're not going to hear it as a lot of compression. But what you do get as a benefit is by driving in, you get a lot more harmonics.
Calling out my name, calling out the,
Okay, very high frequency. We're doing a wide capture there. It's not just de-essing the top, it's actually compressing based on this being fed into the internal side chain of the de-esser. What are we doing here? Well, basically the same, are we not? Right, I actually forgot that that was bypassed when we first looked at it. So yeah, similar sort of thing happening here. Now it is bringing up a lot of the breaths. I did attenuate the breaths in particular during the pre-chorus, just so you can see I've turned them down about 8 dB using clip gain, so before it hits any of the processing on the channel itself. So all of the lead vocal is getting sent to the A bus. Then we've got backing vocals. All the backing vocals are pretty much unprocessed until we get to the V comp. So we've got another V comp getting compressed quite hard by the looks. Containing that backing vocal. Okay, it's obviously necessary to get those up to an appropriate level to cut through and work with the lead vocal. And then we're containing the backing vocals using this lovely MV2. Hopefully by this stage you've seen how I've done this. It should be starting to make sense. The BVs are being sent out to the D bus, which brings us to the back end. All of these are basically groups. They're just extra groups, but we're combining instruments usually. Okay, I make my decision on how I combine them based on what sounds good. So if I threw the vocals and the drums into the A bus and it wasn't working, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to send them into B, send the drums into B, then that's what I would have done. Usually what you do is you send the bass and the drums in particular into the B bus, and that helps them glue together. It's all about gluing the elements together. I'm more than happy to go deeper into this. This is probably beyond the scope of this particular tutorial. So there you have it. Let's have a listen to where it all started. Okay, so there is a massive difference there. And that's just using compression. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Let's move over to the harmonic distortion session. All right, so here we are in the harmonic distortion only challenge. And first thing I want to kind of draw your attention to is that I've actually done a bit of writing on the Mixbus itself. Not something I would normally do a lot of, but it felt like it needed it. Thank you for sticking around this far. We've had a lot of complexity, I would say, with the compression challenge. There's a lot of concepts that people may not understand, and I don't feel like this particular harmonic distortion challenge is going to be that way. It was, I would say, a lot simpler mix and really enjoyable actually, and it exceeded my expectations in some ways. And if I could preface it by saying that the compression only mix, it was quite impactful, it was modern and groove, it was clean. This, on the other hand, is it's quite colored, quite old school. It's not particularly dynamic. Every instrument sits a little bit further back. It's not as in your face as the compression challenge. Everything's a bit dirtier, obviously because we're using harmonic distortion, and there's a little bit less depth. So it does strike me as more of an old school approach. There's some really interesting stuff going on here. I'll get to that towards the end, but just looking at the Mixbus, so we've got this vitamin plugin. Without this, I couldn't probably have done as good a job. This has really made a huge difference. Love this black box. As you can see, I'm not using the air function. I would have liked to have used the air, but I suspect that that is more of an EQ based effect. Calibration is set to normal, and everything else is pretty standard. I'm using a different set of tubes. I'm not driving it too hard. If anyone doesn't know this plugin, basically the pentode section drives into the triode section. So it's a bit of a balancing act. It's a bit of an unusual plugin to get your head around, but it's very cool and it sounds amazing. What I also want to tell you is that I worked on the two mixes side by side by importing the compressor mix into my harmonic distortion mix that I was working on, and just trying to get them as close together in character as I could, not to copy each other. Really like the fact that they do sound different. Anyway, I'll be quiet now and I'll just play the track. So one thing I should have mentioned too is that we have the J37. I have a lot of Waves plugins, so I use them. I am not driving it too hard. Okay, it's not being hit too hard. The bias is an interesting thing. I never realized that the bias affected the top end. So one thing that I've learned through the making of this tutorial is actually that you're actually boosting top end as you go that way. The other interesting takeaway, which I already knew, was that if you're running at 15 IPS, the overall tonality of the tape is pretty much adding a lot of top end. As you go to lower speeds, it becomes better at capturing the low end. But I found that super interesting. These are obviously different formulas. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, because the most interesting thing is, how did I get that sound from all the other different things? Well, obviously Vitamin plays a lot of part in this. That does its thing. Quite a big level increase there, which is great. And the tape. Okay, and you can hear there that it's actually boosting the top end just naturally by having the bias set around there. If I go to 5,
Calling out my name,
it gets ever more brighter.
calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name, calling out the window. Get this.
Let's start from the top, shall we? So the drums, what did I do? Well, I had Vitamin. What was I doing? I was boosting the low end because I didn't like the harshness of the cymbals. What does make a bit of a difference is that I ended up using the wow and the flutter. Not sure if I'm allowed to, but you can see I'm using a lower IPS setting. So I'm trying to then smooth out some of that top end even more. But that wasn't enough. So what I ended up doing was putting some low air on this. This is used in post-production. This is the result. A lot darker there. This one, very similar settings by the looks. Yes, exactly the same actually, but it's set a lot quieter. And then we've used low air again on the ride cymbal. Okay. That's that. Hi-hats, we've got decapitator, and I went a little bit crazy here because it just wasn't giving me what I wanted. I wanted a bit more rhythm out of the hi-hats, and so you'll see I've gone super nuts with the automation. Reason being is that the hi-hat, okay, we're looking at the panning there, and that's because I wanted a little bit more movement to add a bit more rhythm to it. Make it a little less stagnant. Looks like I've got slightly different settings here. Using the Waves vinyl, I'm driving it quite hard, and that's to really shave off those transients, really crunch it up. And then just following that up with the Vitamin plugin. And then that's how we get our stereo effect. The kick. Now, Filter Freak, it has an EQ section essentially, but we're not using it like an EQ. I've wound that all the way up. What I've actually done is I've just left it on the most neutral setting that I could find. I selected an analog style, which was fat. And as you can see here, I've driven the input quite hard just to get the sound that I'm after. So here's how that sounds. Sounds great. Love the sound of that. Got Decapitator to follow that up. Really driving it hard, but I'm actually mixing it back in at about 37%. Really punch it up. Okay, all decisions made in context.
She got the Mercedes-Benz. She got.
And then I've got another, which is the thump. It's only being used in the chorus. Okay, now I could have just used the low air to do this. For whatever reason, this felt a bit better. Coupled with this. The snare. Nice bit of distortion happening there. Right, that is a little bit tippy-tappy. We wanted to get a bit more low end back in there, and now I'm driving it even harder with the crunch. Love that. Absolutely love it. duplicated that. This is obviously same as the other mix challenge with the compression. Both snares are being sent to their own snare master. Let's have a listen to this snare. And that's because we're using SansAmp, we're driving it hard, we're putting in a lot of this buzz. Okay, which is just crunching up the lower frequencies. You can think of these as low mids, and highs. And the other thing to know, I've got a tutorial on this as well, but basically these settings here, they're the unity settings. So you can see we've got EQs here, but we're not actually using them. Now, I'm well aware too that by adding these two together, they're not actually necessarily going to be in phase, but that's okay. But that, you know, that's actually giving me what I want. It's giving me a lot of low end punch. It's giving me length to the hits that I needed in context of the song. Moving along to the toms. Okay, nice tom sound. Very different to what we had. I'm actually using the saturation part of the pre-section in the Shep's Omni channel. Quite a lot of drive going into that. Without that, okay, but decapitator. It's not doing a hell of a lot, but obviously I was getting the sound that I wanted. And then I have this parallel. I'm not even sure if that parallel still exists. Don't think it does. Let's find out, shall we? Show only assignments to that. So it doesn't actually exist. So we can actually get rid of that because it's not relevant. And now we can restore previous. We've got Shep's doing his thing on these channels. We didn't use the decapitator. Looks like I've done a similar thing. You know, if something works, reuse that idea. Pretty much the exact same settings. Looks like I've not routed that properly. Yeah, that's a mistake that I've made. Okay, yeah, pretty much the same settings. We get a nice stereo enhancement. Okay, cool. All of these are controlled by the VCA, so they can be muted, etc. Just a nice convenience during mixing. The drums are being fed into here. Some of them are not being fed into here. Some of them are getting sent into the tape 1, okay? And the actual drum master is getting sent to tape 1. So eventually they end up getting sent to this auxiliary track called tape 1, which I'll get to. Drums overall, we solo those up. That is so cool. Love it. And what I'm hearing there is that it's actually, apart from it being quite a bit quieter, it seems to have compressed it through the actual distortion itself. And then we have 7.5 IPS. We've got the bias turned up to 5, so we're obviously trying to get a bit more top end. And we're driving that output quite a lot. Nothing wrong with that. If it works, it works. So that is getting sent to tape 1. I'll get to those in a minute. Tambourine, nothing happening to that. Claps. Okay, quite big sounding. Okay, that's definitely where most of the sound is coming from. It's obviously too much. Basically, this plugin, you know, it's keep the lows, which basically means that the lows don't get touched and the mid-range and the top end get saturated. And it looks like we wanted to old friend low air in there just to get some of that balance back. Okay, it's interesting. It didn't do what I thought it was going to do, but you know, it is what it is. That's getting sent to the percussion master, and then it's getting sent out to tape 1. That is also getting sent to the same place as all of the drums, essentially. The bass, as a quick overview, it's also getting sent out to this tape 1 auxiliary. The bass mic sounds like this. Okay, so Decapitator is doing its thing there. It's pushed very, very hard. It's actually mixed pretty low, 24%, just to add a little bit of hair. And then we've got our old friend Low Air on the DI. Okay, you can hear the strings a lot. So that's giving us a lot of girth. I've actually copied and I've got max bass on there. The actual original bass is dropped completely and I'm just using the max bass generated upper band. And then I've got R bass. Okay. So it's a different approach for sure than the compressor challenge. Bass doesn't play as prominent a role as it does in the compressor challenge. Getting sent to the tape 1, as I pointed out. The guitars, we have the same sort of panning things happening, or similar sort of panning decisions made across the board for some of these guitars. And then we have, what is this? We've got a multi-band exciter inside of Ozone. Just dirtying it up. What have we got here? Got a bit of crunch happening. The compressor part of Devil Lock is turned off. We're not using the full Monty. We're using just about 50%. And then we've got the drive only being used on this. The EQ is flat on the CQ. That sounds like this when you turn it off. Okay, obviously that is a decision that I made in the context of the mix. It's giving me a little bit of compression. That's getting sent to the guitar master. The next processing I did was a little bit of, this soft tube plugin, great plugin. You definitely can overuse this, which is why I've only got it on this setting, and it's on the neutral setting. Okay, so it's adding a bit of a presence boost. Not much else happening with those guitars. Then we get to these ones here, which look like they've got a bit happening. Okay. Okay, I obviously wanted to get that to pop out a bit more. This is vintage tape setting and it's set to 30 yips. This is actually a parallel. It is exactly in time, so it's actually just there to enhance what's already happening. Sounds like it's providing a little bit of the lows that I was perhaps missing. Because sometimes you work on a part of a mix and you get it sounding how you think you need it to sound, but then after you go, oh, hang on, I actually needed a bit more of that bottom end. And so it looks like that's exactly what I've done. I wanted something to help it cut through without actually adding that bottom end back in. But I digress. Let's move on to the overall processing. The duplicate is pretty much the same settings there, except we've got decapitator on one of them, and it is fully wet, so 100%, and it is driven pretty hard. So we'll get to that in a second. We're driving into this. We've got a bit of the TG desk happening with this vinyl plugin. I liked what it was doing, so it stayed, and we add in the decapitator. Just adds a little bit of excitement around the edges of the mix, and the guitar master and its duplicate are getting sent to this tape 2 auxiliary. Okay, we'll get to that. Sound effects 1, 2, and 3. We have that going into the TG mastering channel strip. We have a bit of a tape equalizer here. I don't know what it's doing, but to me, you know, it's a form of EQ in the harmonic sense. I'm driving into it quite hard. Here it is without that. Okay, apart from that, the EQ is flat. Yeah, pretty cool. The lead vocals, we have Radiator on the verses.
I have to stop by side and stare. The window moves, her face is there.
Okay, got a massive boost there with the Vitamin plugin.
I have to stop by side and stare.
Okay, so we've really mangled that sound there. Let's put these back in. Bit of a drive on the input.
I have to stop by side and stare.
Okay, a little bit of hair on the top of that. Sans amp is always going to do something. EQ's flat. The drive is turned up.
I have to stop by side and stare.
Okay, and that's where the biggest change is coming from. And then we have Vitamin.
I have to stop by side and stare.
Just to rebalance it the way I needed it to be in the mix. The chorus is like so.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
So what have I done? I've used this guitar amp plugin on the chorus. Love it. I don't know why, but it just...
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
It definitely brightens up the sound the way that I needed it to be. Looks like I might have added that and then decided, you know what, I'm going to add in a bunch of low end using the Vitamin Harmonic plugin.
Calling out my name. Calling out the...
Because you would never make that decision without hearing it through that, I don't think.
Calling out my name.
That on its own sounds terrible. We've got Radiator in there. Not sure how these plugins were applied and at what time they were put in, but that would be my guess, is that the Vitamin is there to basically restore some of the low end that I wasn't getting from this. Why it isn't at the back end of this, maybe it didn't sound as good. Always have a go at moving plugins around. See how it sounds. You might actually find that you get something even better than you thought you were going to get just by changing the order of the plugins.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name. Calling out the window.
Okay, not doing a hell of a lot there, but it's the little things that add up. Let's add in these guys.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name. Calling out the window. Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
Slightly different settings on Vitamin that we had from here. Obviously we're not using guitar amp because we want these to be duller. We don't want them to overtake the vocal. And they are most certainly buried, which is great. It's exactly what you want when you're trying to create depth. The double, looks like I've just copied what I had going on these other ones.
Calling out my name. Calling out the window. She's calling out my name.
Could have done without the double, to be honest. It's not adding a whole bunch of stuff. But anyway, all of these are getting sent to the lead vocal master. The lead vocal master, sorry, I'll just solo up all of these. Lead vocal master has the saturation with and without.
Calling out my name, calling out the window. She's calling out my name, calling out the window.
Really brings that vocal out even more. You know, gives it a little bit of an edge, bite. Really love that. Backing vocals. Backing vocals have nothing on them whatsoever until we get to the master. So let's solo them up. We have a high-end boost, a bit of this tape equalizer thing with a little bit of driven input. EQ is flat. Let's find a section. Okay, quite thinned out. Definitely added a lot of clarity to those backing vocals. They're missing the body of the voice, which would be interfering with the lead vocals. There's a lot more low end in that lead vocal. So without that, you don't get that kind of proximity effect, which allows that vocal to sit as forward as it does in front of those quite high end boosted backing vocals, if that makes sense.
Window, calling out my name.
Now, kind of the juiciest part for me, I'm going to file it under that's very interesting and it needs a bit more investigation, but I want to explain what I'm doing here. I have 3 auxiliaries, okay? The drums, the bass, the percussion, and the sound effects are all being fed into tape 1, according to this. If you have a look at the routing, I'm actually going tape 1 feeds into tape 2, and tape 2 feeds into tape 3. Tape 3 feeds into the main mix. Okay, so these are actually in series, but what's happening is that the drums come in at this point and they go through this plugin, they come out of this channel, and then they go into this channel. And when they come into this channel, they are then joined with the guitars. So whatever got processed in this bus here then gets combined with this. And then that then comes out, it goes into tape 3, and tape 3 it has lead vocals and backing vocals added to these previous 2 buses. So actually going serially and then kind of joined in parallel by the guitars and then the lead vocals and backing vocals. If you're not sure what I'm talking about there, it's okay. I'm more than happy to do a tutorial on that, but it was one of those things that I kind of came up with on the spot. And the reason I came up with it was because in the same way that the Beatles would have run their mix through a tape machine, they were recording to tape, but they were also running, if they had say 4 tracks, if they wanted to get more juice out of that 4-track recorder, they'd take those 4 tracks and they'd combine them down to 1, okay? And that's how they get basically 12 tracks. Kind of taking on that methodology, everything that combines into one section, in this case, we're combining it into the J37, the first one, combining the drums, the bass, the percussion, and the sound effects into this one tape machine. Whatever's loudest is probably going to make that tape compress, okay, because there is such a thing as tape compression, and we're getting a little bit of that. My understanding would be that the drums would mostly be driving that compression, but then what we can do is we can have the guitars influence that on the next round when we've got the drums, bass, and percussion and all of that combined from tape 1 and the guitar into this next kind of funnel. And I wouldn't say that I'm 100% sold on this idea, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. And I didn't hate it. So I'm going to file this entire technique under it needs further investigation. But yeah, I thought taking something like what the Beatles did, putting the same thing through a Fairchild, that's going to impart a certain sound over the entire group based on what's being fed into it. So taking that idea further, I thought, you know, maybe that'll work with the tape machine. So that was my idea. So we're going tape 1, going into tape 2, we're joined by the guitar. Tape 3 is then joined by the lead vocals and the backing vocals. Reason why I fed them in last is because I want them to kind of more or less control any tape compression that is happening in there. If we have a look, I don't think I've set it up pretty modestly, so it's not slamming the tape. Didn't sound very good when I did. So we're a little bit in the red there. Let's add in we can mute that and we can hear the guitars and the vocals separate.
Calling out my name,
Okay, so I was wrong. I was actually driving those tapes probably a bit hard, but I did play with the input and the output just to try and get a little bit more juice out of that. I'm actually using different tape settings too, as you can see there. So by the time we get to here, we're at 15 IPS and we're at normal bias. We're using different tracks down here. I hope you enjoyed that. I survived the challenge. Please hit me up with any questions as they come to mind. I'm more than happy to answer those. I shall see you in a future tutorial. I've lost the will to speak properly, speak words. Anyway, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you learned a bunch. Until next time, happy mixing.